they just need a few more crises to get people to surrender more of their freedom. And the COVID was a perfect example of that.
Do you think that was a failure from their side, or they think that was success?
Well, the way it works is they do something. It's like that triangle of Hagel. They push, and then they know at some point people are not going to go anymore, and then they come up and say, well, we'll just settle for half as bad. And it's like, oh, man, so I'm relieved. It's not. But then they wait and do another cycle of it, and then they'll go push, and then they to the limit until people say, I've had enough, and then the people settle for. So they go back and strategize and say, okay, how can we do it better next time? And so if you noticed, like before COVID, you had globalists and Bill Gates and others in New York or one of those cities where they planned 2 years before COVID, what if there was a international pandemic, and what would be the response, and this and that. And they basically, it looks like they planned, because the response was exactly what they had planned in the meeting.
Coincidence.
And then another one was, after that, you had Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, and some others, and they planned, what if there was a international internet blackout? And so the thought is, well, gee, are they planning that next? And if you've noticed, Spain has a blackout, other countries has a blackout, and it's like, are they testing the waters? And if you think of it, if there was, and they say now with AI that there is no security, that they literally can hack everything. So it's tenuous. And that's why I think, in my own personal view, Trump is not a globalist. He's a Make America Great Again. He is more or less the last chance to stop the globalist movement. And because if he was no longer there, what would happen? Well, you probably have politicians in America going to the rich guys saying, give me money so I can get elected. And it would embolden Russia. It would embolden Xi Jinping in China. It would embolden, North Korea. It would embolden the Ayatollah. You basically go back to gang war. It would be a gang war on a global scale with the most up-to-date weapons and tracking technology.
But you want to tell me that they wanted to kill him and they didn't succeed?
Yeah.
They couldn't do it.
It was a miracle.
Really?
Yeah.
And only, let's say, 2 attempts, at least that we know of.
Yeah. You think of, so from God's point of view, he created us for fellowship. And before the flood, according to the Bible, people were living centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And right before the Midrash, which is the Jewish oral tradition, says that one planting would produce enough food for 40 years. I mean, if they're living centuries, you had to have enough food, and you had to have pretty good health. But what do people do when they have lots of food and lots of health? They end up fighting with each other. And it says that before the flood, the thoughts of man were on evil continually. Mm-hmm. And they chose not to retain God in their thoughts, and it repented God that he even made man. Mm-hmm. One translation says it broke God's heart. It's like, I made these people for fellowship, and people structured their lives so they could go days, weeks, months, centuries without thinking about God. Could you imagine the Holy Spirit in front of somebody's face for a century trying to get their attention? Like, I got this pattern, I don't think. And so after the flood, God said, we're going to do plan B. Plan B is, it says he gives us over to our own devices, he hides his face, and we go through tough times, and we turn to him out of desperation. So he created us to fellowship with him. And it's like, if plan A, if blessings don't turn people to God, then there's the plan B. I'm going to let you go through some trials. And we turn to God in desperation. And think about yourself. Do we tend to pray more when everything's fine, or when we go through a crisis? Even we should pray all the time in fellowship with God, but human nature is such when we have the crisis, that's when we really turn to the Lord. But his goal is to have us turn to him. And some people, instead of turning, they harden their heart, they get bitter, they blame him, and then they make their choice. I'm going to go the other way, right? Because if you're God and you want to populate heaven, wouldn't you want to populate it with people who wanted to be around you? Mm-hmm. Which means you had to give them the choice of not being around you for the choice to love you and be around, to be the choice. Our life on earth is sort of like this experiment greenhouse where we have the choice. And we choose, do we want to be around God? Do we not? And anyway, so every generation has a crisis. Attila the Hun had an army of 500,000 men wiping out cities in Europe. Genghis Khan kills 30 million people from Korea to Hungary to Russia. The bubonic plague, the Spanish flu. I mean, every generation has a crisis that's really bad. And what happens in the crises? Some people turn to Christ and they step up and they say, okay, God, here I am, use me. There's a bunch of needs, and you go out and you take care of them. And other people end up hating God and turning and worrying about selfish stuff rather than other people. And so it's sort of a mini self-sorting out of the sheep and the goats. It's not the end times one, right? When, Lord, did we take care of you? When I was sick and you doctored me and fed me and clothed me and whatever you do to the least of these my brethren, you've done unto me. And so when we realize that we're free will creatures, and it's almost like God is saying, okay, we're getting close to the end. We're the bride of Christ. The church is the bride of Christ. And every romance novel builds up to a key part in the movie, a forsaking of all others and choosing the one. Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe the girl's got a couple guys dating her and she's like, oh, is it this one? And then it's the big night. She's got her dress. She's all ready, did her hair. It's like going to be a dance. She's all excited. And the guy calls at the last minute and says, oh, I got this job and I got to miss it. You'll understand, won't you? And then there's this other guy that'll crawl across glass just to spend a few minutes with her. She goes, you know what? This crisis moment reveals to me that this guy really doesn't love me and this guy does. And I think God puts the world time after time after time, but we're getting close to the end time where there's crisis moments and people make a choice that they would rather not want to be doing what God is. In other words, like, hey, God, I'm going to surrender my will to you. I'm going to do what you want. And I think we're getting close to the end because God is letting the evil be exposed in a way that I've never seen before. I mean, we had, stories of Satan clubs on elementary school campuses, Satan worshiping Grammys, Satan trans clothes designers for Target. Iowa State.
Never ever before.
Yeah.
Like never.
Iowa State Capitol had a Satan statue in it. And it's like, I've never seen this before. And God's like, okay, it's like The Wizard of Oz, that movie, and at the end there's this dog, Toto, that pulls back the curtain. You see, I'm the great Oz, and it's an old man at a microphone. You're not scared of him anymore. And God's like, okay, we're getting close to the end. You're not a robot. You're a free will being, but I need you to hurry up and make your decision. So I'm going to pull back the curtain. God, devil, choose. And some people are going to choose the all others. They're going to want to be liked and friended and followed, and they're going to say, okay, I'll accept this behavior if it means people will think nice of me, and I'll accept this next behavior until pretty soon, okay, I'll accept Satan, because they're drug along because they want to. And then others are saying, I'm sorry, I draw the line here. I'm not going to be quiet when they want to mutilate and do a hysterectomy on an 8-year-old girl because she went through a tomboy phase. I'm not going to want to castrate a little boy because he played with his sister's Barbie doll. And they cut the rubber band and it snaps. And I think God is pushing the world to a point in the movie where you have to make a decision. And so this is separating. And so people are revealing in the time of crises what they really believe and whose side they're on. And anyway, I know I've sort of talked history and I've sort of talked, theology type stuff, but
it's all aligning. So in 2020 was one of those cycles, right? We had the COVID for two years, let's say. Prior to that, during COVID, there was a summer of love with the BLM. You think we're in that new cycle right now with the LA riots, Israel and Iran?
Yeah, well,
Russia,
actually,
Ukraine.
It goes back to Occupy Wall Street.
2008?
Yeah, so you go back and there was this movement across America where they set up homeless tents in city parks all across the country. And then the next iteration was the George Floyd riots in the cities. The next iteration was Seattle with autonomous zones where they literally took over the downtown for weeks, and Portland, Oregon, and other places. Well, what's the next iteration? I mean, I think they would love to have actual violence and killing in cities across the country, so that everybody would say, government, come in and restore order. And the government says, okay, we'll do it. But I think that people have been praying, and God has been putting off that because we repented. And I think it was a miracle that Trump got elected. I think it was a miracle that he didn't get his head blown apart, right? And I think that it's in response. Caesar wanted to have a worldwide tracking system. I mean, here's the most powerful guy in the world wanting to have everybody be counted. And it was that census that caused Joseph and Mary to leave Nazareth and go to Bethlehem, where the prophecies said that Jesus would be born. So behind, the devil thinks, I'm going to get control, but God's behind it saying, no, I'm fulfilling my plan.
You're actually part of the plan.
I think of the devil tried to tempt Jesus, and Jesus said, it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. And so the devil couldn't tempt him. So the devil's like, I'm going to kill him. And so he gets the Jews and the Gentiles, right? So the Jews, there was this short period in Israel's history where the Romans took control and did not allow the Jews to carry out capital punishment. And so the Jews are occupied by the Romans, and they want to kill Jesus, but they can't so they take Jesus to the Gentiles. And then the Romans kill Jesus. So you have the devil saying, I'm going to get the Jews, I'm going to get the Gentiles, we're going to kill Jesus. And Jesus is on the cross and he says, it is finished. And the devil's like, what's finished? He got the Jews and the Gentiles to sacrifice the Lamb of God so that the sins of the world would be put upon Jesus, and he would pay for the sins of the world, so that anybody that believes in Jesus could approach an all-just God and not have to be judged by this all-just God, because Jesus took the judgment in our place and we're approaching him through Jesus. The devil got his job. He loses his job. What's the name Satan? It means accuser of the brethren. So the devil, the devil's before God, and he accuses us to God. And he says, this person sinned. You're a just God. You got to judge him. And if you don't judge him by your silence, you're actually giving consent to their sin. And if you give consent to sin, you're no longer a just God. And so the devil accuses us to God. And like the book of Job, the devil goes before God and says, well, the reason Job's being so nice is because you're playing favorites. Mm-hmm. You're blessing him extra special. Anybody would be good if they're blessed extra special. So you're not really a fair God. You're an unjust God because you're... And God's like, nope, I'm not playing extra favorites, right? Have at him, right? But the devil is accusing and says, okay, Bill sinned or whoever sinned. And God, if you're a just God, you got to judge them, because if you don't judge their sin, your silence is giving consent to the sin. It's called the rule of tacit admission, T-A-C-I-T. And it's in our Constitution, right? Article 1, Section 7. Congress puts a bill on the president's desk, and it says, if any bill shall not be signed by the president within 10 days, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it. So his silence equals his signature. It's in real estate law. You buy a rent house for some retirement income and a squatter moves in. And if you know about it and you're silent, they can gain title to your rent house through adverse possession. They can say, well, you know about it. You didn't try to evict him. I talked to a farmer, and he had a neighbor had a road that went across his property to get to the main road. And they were friends, so it was no problem. Well, the neighbor dies, and methamphetamine dealers buy it. And they're having traffic all day and night. And this guy tries to stop him. And they say, no, man, we've been using this road. We're going to continue. He goes down to the courthouse, and they say, yes, it's the law. If you let somebody drive across your land for 20 years, they get permanent access.
That's the law.
And so it was 19 years. He had quickly filed the paperwork, and they were able to stop it and put up the fence saying, sorry, no more access. It's in trademark law. You design a trademark. Somebody copies it, and it's all over the internet. If you do not try to defend your trademark, they all get to use it. Your silence gives consent. And so if there are sins and God is silent in not judging the sin, by default, he would be giving consent to the sin. And if God gives consent to sin, he's denying his just nature. He's denying himself. So he has to judge the sin. But the gospel is Jesus took the judgment in our place. So God can maintain that he's a just God, but he's a loving God, that he provided Jesus. And Jesus, out of love for the Father and you and me, was willing to become the Lamb and take the judgment in our place so that we can approach this all just God and not have to worry about being judged. The Lamb is God's way to love you without having to judge you. It's his plan to get around his own just nature so he can maintain that he's just and not have to change that he judged every sin, but he's love and that he provided the Lamb to take the judgment. And so Satan is constantly accusing us to God, but once Jesus died on the cross, he lost his job. In other words, he says, God, they sinned, and you got to judge them. And God said, I did judge them in Christ, and they're approaching me through Christ. So they took the judgment on it. So they've already been judged. And the devil's like, but. He goes, no buts. They're approaching me through Christ. They've already paid for their sin. And it says the accuser of the brethren was cast down. Right? It's like, so now he's just waiting till he gets judged, And